Hello and welcome back for another awesome episode of the Fit 40 podcast. Today we're going to be talking about mastering your macros for the best results possible because I know macros is a hot topic. People know that there is some sort of secret sauce there, but unfortunately a lot of people do struggle with it. So I'm going to lay out a framework that's going to allow you to master it in a way that's going to feel a lot easier, a lot smoother, and it's going to result in you getting the best results possible. So let's jump in. And actually, before I do, make sure to follow along if you are a return listener and you want to catch the next episode. And if you're a new one, I hope that you enjoy this episode so much that you're like, I got to follow this guy. So just a quick reminder. Now let's jump in. So the first thing I want to cover is that when it comes to macros, it's a journey. This, unfortunately, is something that is underplayed because a lot of fitness people that do subscribe to macro counting come from many different paths, whether that's like, oh, I started on Weight Watchers, I started on Herbalife, I started doing mindful eating, I started with Whole30. All these different things teach all these different types of skills that we really downplay. And we're like, oh, all you have to do is track macros. And it's like, that's not that simple. Okay. So when it comes to the journey that I put my own clients through, we start off with PFC, protein, fiber, color, then calories, then macros. Because what this allows for is number one, it helps you build the skills that are required to make this very smooth and make sure you don't fall into the common pitfalls that so many do. Number two, it allows you to build a whole lot of confidence because if you keep it simple in the beginning and you nail it, you have this positive momentum going forward rather than that feeling of like you just jumped in the deep end and you just can't get any sort of momentum going and you feel like a failure the whole time. And then last but not least is that momentum that I just mentioned. Like you are building this snowball and you're like, okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? Not, oh my God, I can't even nail step one. So what is step one? PFC for the people I work with. Now, what is that? Protein, fiber, and color. Basically putting your plate together. There's many different ways to put a plate together based on government guidelines, based on textbook guidelines. A bunch of people have their own ways of doing this, but PFC is mine. And when it comes to this, the reason that I start on that is like just putting protein, fiber, color on the plate. It's a way to build consistency because when people start off counting calories, counting macros, there is a lot of inconsistency. And it's kind of like we're playing catch up the entire time. But when you have PFC, you're like, okay, I nail it. It's pretty simple. It's like, how hard is it to find protein and color that you could put on a plate? And when you have some sort of bread, some sort of pasta, you just make sure that it's a whole grain source or something like that with fiber in it. It's like, it's really not that hard. And you can do it without having to think about it. And if God forbid you forget to log it, like we have a tracking software that allows us to keep track of how much protein, how many fiber sources, how much color we got throughout the day. You can think back on the meal you had and you're like, oh, I kind of remember that, rather than saying, so was that 6 ounces or 4 ounces of chicken? Did I get color on the plate? Was it enough of this micronutrient or that macronutrient? No. All we have to do is be like, okay, well, I had the burrito bowl. That was pretty easy. Chicken, brown rice, and some fajita veggies. PFC, done. So it's very simple. And then on top of that, we focus on things like portion control. So we can't just have as much protein, fiber, color as we want and expect ourselves to get the results that we want if the goal is weight loss or anything like that, because it is possible to overeat on that stuff as well. So we focus on the one plate rule where it's like, get your PFC, but have it on one standard size plate. And that for a lot of people is very familiar. It's like, okay, I get one plate per meal. And it's very simple to follow as long as we're not stacking food and we're not leaving white space. So that covers two things. Number one, we don't have any white space, so we're not under eating. That way you're actually getting something that is not a pigeon portion, which so many people are accustomed to on all these other weight loss plans where they have them eating these tiny little bars or this 200 calorie breakfast. It's like anything that's 200 calories is not a meal, that's a snack. All right, so we get a solid amount of calories on the plate, enough to fuel you, not starve you. And you don't have too much, you don't stack food, because that helps us not overeat. Which if you're doing protein, fiber, color, it's very hard to overeat on calories, sticking to that guideline of the one plate rule. And this allows us to also focus in on the big thing when it comes to your macros, like when it comes to protein, carbohydrates, and fats, is where are the sources? Like what are the sources that are going to lead us to get those macronutrients? And that's going to be a skill in itself. So how do we find the protein, the fiber, and the color based on the way that we're used to eating and the way that we need to eat moving forward. And then last but not least is we also incorporate the art of using the scale. So understanding what a serving size looks like. And this is mostly for fats because like when we cook with oils and things like that, it says 0 calories on the spray, or a lot of people do what's called the Italian drizzle, where they just close their eyes and they put the olive oil all over the pan and say, ah, that looks good enough, where it's like that is literally hundreds of calories. So just by measuring out, okay, this is a serving of olive oil, then you're now mastering the art of weighing your food on a scale. You're understanding, okay, I need to zero this out. I need to make sure that this is in grams, not in ounces or whatever it is, and getting familiar with it without so much pressure of fitting all these puzzle pieces in while you're doing it. All right. Then, after we've done all that for usually about a month, people nail it. And then we move on to calories. So, we're not quite at full blown macros yet, but there's calories is like that middle ground, that next step up. And what this does is it allows us to get into the frame of mind of, I need to hit my calorie budget. This is like, okay, I got to get between this number and that number. And based on how my day goes, I need to learn how to navigate those waters. Now, this is one way to regress macros, because instead of saying, I got to hit my protein, I got to hit my carbs, I got to hit my fat here, there, it's like, no, instead of focusing on three things, you're just focusing on one. Just nail those calories. And then this allows us to understand portions to that next degree, where it's like, okay, food is worth this many calories, and that many calories is going to lead to my body responding in this way after doing that for X amount of time, because then we could see trends. And then once we have done that, we could also tread the waters of, okay, this is how I should guesstimate when I go out to restaurants, because restaurants, you don't really have a whole grasp on as far as how much oil they're using, which they're, let me just say this, when it comes to chefs, no chef is back there, or very few are back there thinking, I want to make sure everybody has the lowest calories possible. No, what they want is for you to have an extraordinary culinary experience. At least I hope they do. And regardless of calories, they're focusing on taste. And the things that impact taste, one of the big ones is fat. So that, along with salt, acidity, and heat, but fat is the one that comes with the calories. The other ones you can go nuts on, assuming that you don't have to watch your sodium for whatever health conditions that is associated with. But when it comes to the acid and the heat, usually you don't have to worry about that. And that can help a ton as far as flavor profiles go when you're at home and even when you're out. But the oil is really the big one when it comes to going to restaurants. So you got to understand, how do I guesstimate? How do I get myself in this ballpark of being able to kind of be close to where my calories are, rather than having a case of the fuckets and saying, I'm out to dinner, I don't know what the heck I'm eating, might as well get the best thing on the menu. And then that turns into a situation where it's like you're probably going way, way over, and you could potentially put yourself into calorie maintenance or possibly even a calorie surplus at the end of the week, just because of this one meal. Because when you're out to restaurants, it's possible. It's very possible to eat 3, 4, 5, 6,000 calories in one sitting between the appetizer, the entree, the dessert, the booze, the bread basket. That stuff can easily knock you out of a calorie deficit. So we got to understand where that line lies and understand, okay, you know what? When I'm out to this restaurant, I'm going to say in the calorie calculator that I went with this meal at this chain restaurant, for example. So, like, let's say you got Buffalo Wild Wings at a local bar and you have no idea. Go to B Dubs, Buffalo Wild Wings in the tracker and say, okay, this looks about right. It's not some crazy value of calories that makes 0 sense. Like, I definitely didn't need 1,000 calories of wings because I had two of them. But at the same time, it's not so low that it's like homemade wings and you're just like, oh, well, that's not right either. You find that middle ground. And by doing that, that keeps you kind of in the ballpark, and you work on that skill. And then we also want to work on limiting how many times you go out if your goal is to improve your body composition, because going out frequently is very challenging to be able to do that. Some people can, and many have, but that's another level of skill that you need to learn. And then once we have done all of this, we've collected all these skills, and we know how to weigh our food, we know how to find protein, fat, carb sources that are going to help us hit our goals, then you can finally level it up and be like, okay, It's macro time. I've got all this stuff down. I really don't have to worry about it. I get it at this point. Now, let's work on cranking certain numbers up and bringing certain numbers down. And for many people, that is going to be bringing protein up and bringing fat down. So if when you're able to do that and you're like, listen, okay, when it comes to protein, I just have to have, like, instead of about a palm size of chicken at lunchtime, I'm going to have like one and a half or even two. So when I go to Chipotle, instead of the one scoop, I'm going to get two. And what that's going to do is up my protein. And then how the heck am I going to get my fat down? You're like, all right. So I usually have this pack of nuts because I need a snack at this time. But that pack of nuts is pushing my fat count a little high. So you're like, all right, I'll sacrifice on the nuts and then I will try to fill myself up on more protein instead of that. And then you understand these trade-offs going on in your head and you're like, okay, now I can actually hit these numbers rather than I'm just going to track everything and pray to God that I end up in my macro ratios. Okay. And then when you do this, it'll allow you to fine tune every little thing and really get to that next level of how is my body responding to these things. But that being said, if we're being totally honest, for most people who are not in a super duper competitive setting, you're not a physique athlete or anything like that. If you focus on protein and fiber and your calories, you will be a-okay, because there are many, many, many studies where they have controlled for calories and protein, and then they kind of let the carbs and fats go wherever they want. And the results are pretty much identical, like not to a T, but it's not even a significant amount based on the difference. And you could even make an argument that, because a lot of people think, oh, low carb is the way. And we could go off on a different tangent there. But you can make an argument that based on the fact that, one, many people love carbohydrates, and two, there's not a significant difference. Chances are you're going to have better success keeping more carbohydrates in your diet while sticking to your calorie goal, because you're going to be able to adhere to it better. You're going to be able to stay consistent because you're like, oh, instead of avoiding all these foods, I can actually include them and get that hit and not have to sacrifice any part of my culture or sacrifice any like really good food that I like to enjoy with my family or any of these other things that influence food decisions. So you could keep certain macros in there at higher amounts based on your lifestyle and things like that. And then I'm going to steal this one from one of my favorite coaches out there, Aram Gregorian, or better known as 4 Weeks to the Beach. One really good rule when it comes to macros is plus or minus 10%. So let's say you're using Chronometer, for example, which is the one I tell everybody to get since it still has the free barcode scanner, unlike some who love to nickel and dime every little aspect of their app. MyFitnessPal. Anywho, when it comes to Chronometer, for example, you're able to see like plus or minus how far off you are from your goal. So it'll have protein, carbohydrates, fats. Then you just say, okay, I'm going to stay within plus or minus 10%. So it'll have that on calories. It'll also have it on calories too. So you're all kind of in the ballpark, because at the end of the day, if you hit your macros to a T on that number every single time, guess what? You're still not actually hitting your numbers, because labels round to the nearest 5 calories and they can be off by a good amount. So if you ever wondered why every single calorie count in the US shows, oh, it's always like to the 5 or the 10 calories, that's why. So there's a margin of error there, which allows for the fact that we don't have to be perfect. We just need to be in the ballpark most of the time for long enough. All right. And then, like I said, calories, protein, and fiber are the most important. So when it comes to calories, make sure it's the amount that you've been using that will result in about half a pound to a pound of weight loss week. And that's a really healthy way to go about it. You feel the best and you're more likely to keep the weight off long term. Then when it comes to protein, we want about 0.7 grams of your total body weight in protein. So if you're, say, 200 pounds, that's 140 grams of protein. But I've found with larger individuals that have higher body fat percentages, if you can do something like the Navy test where you get your neck, waist, hip, and then your weight and plug that in, or if you could get a DEXA scan or an in-body scan and you can find out whatever your lean body mass number is, that's your skeletal muscle mass. Like on an in-body, it's SMM, and the lean body mass, like basically if you were to take all of the fat mass off of the scale, whatever you're left with, that in grams. So for example, my lean body mass is in the 170s. So if I go a gram per pound of that, I would do like 170 grams of protein as my goal. And then when it comes to fiber, because this one also is super duper important, host of health benefits, and it also helps a lot with staying full, and it's really good for your gut and all, just so many different things. Okay, when it comes to fiber, you want 10 to 15 grams per 1,000 calories. So if you are having, say, I want to pick easy math here. If you're having 2,000 calories, that's anywhere from 20 to 30 grams of fiber. So the general recommendation for most people is just get over at least 25 grams. And that's kind of like my bare minimum. So if you can get up to 25 grams and anything over that's probably a plus, but this also depends on your specific situation. Category of people in particular that can have different rules when it comes to fibers, like the IBS crowd, because sometimes you do need to let your gut kind of chill for a little bit and let it do its thing. But this is something that you talk to your registered dietitian about, your doctor. I am not giving medical advice. I'm just saying this is like general rules. And if you want like full on do this, and this, go to your registered dietitian and get their input on that and take it from there. All right. And let me just end with saying you do not need to be perfect. Like I said, let's follow a ROM's rules when it comes to the macros, plus or minus 10% on calories, protein, carbohydrates, and fats. And then when it comes to which option you should select, like if you want to go the macro route, that's awesome. If you want to do just calories, also great. I would make an argument that you should get protein in there though. And if you want to go just PFC, that's fine too, because one of the things that I learned when I got my certification through precision nutrition, and it proved itself over the years, because I'll be honest, in the beginning, when I heard this concept, I'm like, this is bullshit. You need to do everything the right way, quote unquote, the right way. You want to know somebody's early on in their training career or doesn't know shit about anything fitness, nutrition related. They just say things are the right way. Okay. There is no right way. The only right way is the one that works for you. And it's just a fact. When you have a lot more weight to lose, you can get away with approaches like PFC. You can get away with approaches like just focusing on the food quality, because when you do that, if you are at a very elevated body fat percentage and you don't have any real food skills built in, and then you switch that, all of a sudden your body responds in a number of beneficial ways, and you see those results pretty easily, and you don't need to go down that rabbit hole of doing all the extra stuff. But once, let's say you could honestly just ride it and find out, like you could do PFC at the start of your journey and say, you know what, I'm going to milk this for all it's worth. I'm just going to take this as far as I can until I hit a plateau. It's like, cool. Then once you've done that, it's like, okay, I'm not seeing the same types of results. Let's go the calories. Let's add those in while sticking to my PFC stuff. Like I'll still get protein, fiber, color on the plate, and I'll make sure my calories line up where they need to. And then you follow that. And honestly, for the majority of people, if they just did that, they'd probably be A-okay. But let's say you get to that point where you can't see any more results. It's like, okay, we'll take you to that next level of macros. We'll make sure we're doing everything we possibly can in our power to make sure that we get results. And then once we've hit that point, it's like, okay, now let's see what other aspects we can manipulate here, whether that's activity, whether that's stress management, whether that's sleep and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that has to be the exact route. I'm just saying that is a route that you can take. And honestly, if you want to shorten this gap as possible, as closely as possible, and you get the results fast without having to hit all these unnecessary plateaus and learn a bunch of stuff all over again, that's what coaches are for. If you like what I'm saying, if you're picking up what I'm putting down, the link is down below if you want to apply. But if you want the other stuff that'll help with that as well, there's also the high protein recipe book that you can take full advantage of. It's got a sample meal plan in there. It's got a grocery list in there, so you can check that out. And there's also the Fit 40 family, where we do daily tips and monthly challenges, where you can actually get some motivation and inspiration to do these things if you need that little bit of a kick in the butt. So definitely check that out in the description or in the show notes, wherever you're watching or listening. And that is that for today. So thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that follow before you leave. And until next time, go kick some ass. I'll see you later.